It has been a surprising free agency period for the New York Jets, but I think it's clear what they've been trying to accomplish with their signings. And I'll explain what that is today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, March 17th, 2025. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, today we're going to talk about what specifically the Jets have been trying to accomplish in free agency this year. And I think there's been a lot of surprise in the fan base because, frankly, the team has not been that active. You have not seen many big ticket moves. And on Friday, we discussed a bit about how that's probably part of a broader strategy, how the Jets, we're in kind of a tight cap situation this offseason. But today I'd like to go more specific. I'd like to talk about some of the signings they made and exactly what the Jets are hoping to get out of these signings. And I'm going to begin by talking about the highest profile signing. And probably the reason it's the highest profile signing is that it's at the most important position on the field. That is the quarterback position. And it's tough to believe, but it was just a week ago that news broke that the Jets had agreed to terms with quarterback Justin Fields. We're 1 week into free agency, folks. Things move quickly in the NFL. And I've seen some analysis on Fields, and I think some of it is kind of lacking. I don't think that the Jets are signing Justin Fields with the idea that they're tanking this season. That's what some people have claimed. So there are a lot of people out there who are not big Justin Fields fans. There are also some people out there who said, well, maybe Justin Fields could be the long-term quarterback for the Jets. Now, I'm sure the Jets would sign up for that. I think if Fields goes out and improves his level of play to the point where he could be a long-term solution, I think the Jets would be delighted with that. But I'm not sure that's necessarily the purpose of this signing. I view Fields not as a short-term solution for the team, not as a long-term solution, but as more of a medium-term solution. And what do I mean by that? I don't think that Justin Fields is very likely to be the Jets quarterback for the next decade. It's just he's got a long way to go to develop to get to that point. But I do think it's possible he could develop to the point where he could be the quarterback for a couple of years. And I think that would be significant because that buys you time. Now, I'm going to ask you to think back to the past. We're going to go back 16 years. The Jets drafted Mark Sanchez in 2009 because Brett Favre retired that offseason. And it was a lot of the parallels to this offseason where the Green Bay Packers legend leaves the Jets. And Favre later unretired and signed with the Minnesota Vikings. But at the time of the 2009 draft, Favre was retired. And he was not coming back to the Jets, more important than the fact he unretired and went to Minnesota. So the Jets were kind of desperate. They needed a quarterback badly, and they traded up for Mark Sanchez. Now, the Jets had some early success as a team with Sanchez, and Sanchez had some clutch moments with the team. But ultimately, that draft pick did not pan out. Fast forward to 2013. Again, the Jets were desperate at the quarterback position. Now, to John Idzik's credit, he had 2 first-round picks. He did not use either on Geno Smith, who was a bit of a project. But in the second round, he drafted Geno Smith, and I think it was a defensible pick. I think part of the reason the pick was made was the Jets were desperate at the quarterback position. Fast forward to 2018. Jets, again, had nothing at the quarterback position. Mike McCagnon had pretty much spent the entire 2017 season lining up to get in the position to draft a quarterback, and he traded up from 6 to 3 in that year's draft. They go get Sam Darnold. Fast forward, another 3 years. Darnold hasn't panned out. The Jets trade him. Jets draft Zach Wilson in 2021, second overall. In all of these situations, the Jets kind of put themselves in the position where they felt like they had to draft a quarterback because the hole at the quarterback position was so profound. You never want to be in a position where you have to draft a quarterback because, by the way, all 4 of those guys started as rookies. Now, Smith may not have started if Mark Sanchez had not gotten injured in a preseason game, but 3 of the 4 started by design. And I think the Jets have put themselves in a really bad situation with these young quarterbacks when these guys have to start. when you draft a young quarterback, you want the young quarterback to be able to come along at his own pace. And, the most famous example of that is Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs drafted him in 2017. They traded up to 10 to get Mahomes. I think it was to 10 to get Mahomes in 2017. And Mahomes had this first year. He only started one game. It was a Week 17 game. It was the final game of the regular season where the Chiefs had already clinched their seeding, and they let him play a game in Denver. And he played pretty well, and the Chiefs won that game. But Mahomes was not pressed into the starting lineup. And then when they put him in 2018, he had the best play caller in the league in Andy Reid. He had an offense that was loaded with talents. You could talk Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, even Sammy Watkins was part of that team. It was an ideal situation for Mahomes to grow up in. And I think part of the hidden story about Mahomes' greatness is the situation he was put in. No, that's not to say, Mahomes' development is the most important part of is the most important part of his story. Mahomes' work himself. What Mahomes has done, that's the most important part of his story. That's not to say, none of this is to say that Mahomes is purely a result of his circumstances. But it is to say he was put into a favorable situation, and the Chiefs put themselves into a good spot. And why did the Chiefs have the luxury of waiting to put Mahomes into the starting lineup? Why did the Chiefs have the luxury of letting Mahomes sit for a year? It's because they had Alex Smith. And they had Alex Smith since 2013. They drafted Mahomes in 2017. They had Alex Smith since 2013. And my view has always been that Alex Smith gave the Chiefs the luxury of time. He put them in a situation where they did not feel the need to draft a quarterback until the perfect guy came along. They weren't like the Jets were in 2009 or 2013 or 2018 or 2021. They had a stable enough quarterback in their lineup that they felt they were fine with what they had until a higher ceiling option came along. And I think if you're asking what's the objective for the Justin Fields signing, again, look, if Justin Fields goes out there and improves to the point where he can be the long-term quarterback for the Jets, they certainly would take that. But I don't think the signing was made with that in mind. It was a 2-year contract worth $40 million, $20 million guaranteed. So shows you, they're thinking beyond this year, but they're not thinking that far beyond this year with Justin Fields. And if Fields goes out and surprises them, if Fields goes out and have a great season, they can reassess. But really, I think what they want out of Justin Fields is for Fields to grow to the point where they'll feel okay about starting him. Fields has some flaws to his game. He doesn't have great pocket presence. He's capable of making reads, but he misses too many of the reads. But he also brings some positive skills to the table. He's got a lot of physical talent. He's not a terrible passer. He can have big passing games even if he's inconsistent. His rushing ability, can elevate an offense to another level. There's a lot of good that Fields brings, but he does have to improve to the point where he can be that stabilizing presence for the Jets. But I think that's the goal. I think you combine Fields' natural ability, you combine that with 4 years of experience in the NFL trying to learn concepts. I think you combine that with a new offensive coordinator in Tanner Engstrand, who the Jets are high on, who hopefully will be as good as advertised. The objective is for Justin Fields to provide the Jets with a floor. It's to provide the Jets with enough stable quarterback play where they don't feel like heading into the 2026 draft that they're desperate to draft somebody. They feel like, we can compete with these guys. We can compete with this guy at quarterback. And the significance of that is also that if the quarterback plays at a stable enough level, you'll probably win some games and you'll probably be a competitive football team. So I think this is the focus for Justin Fields. And I think Justin Fields is a very polarizing player. There's some people who love him. There's some people who really hate him. But I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. The hope is that he improves to the point where he gives the Jets good enough quarterback play until they can find the right guy. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the new look secondary. To the extent the Jets spent money beyond the quarterback position, most of it was in the defensive backfield. I think there's a rhyme and reason to that. And in some ways, the two guys they signed have similar profiles. We'll go into all that and more as we continue here on this Monday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you're spending on food delivery. Now you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. This episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. You may have your eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. Then the FanDuel app is simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. Very exciting tournament locally, St. John's, looking like a contender to get to the Final Four. But I don't know, you may have gone to college anywhere. If your team's in the big dance, or even if your team's not in the big dance, FanDuel's the place to get in on the action. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on college hoops action all tournament long. Again, FanDuel.com to get in on college hoops action all tournament long. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. It's been an interesting free agent period for the New York Jets. I think that might be the best way to put it, because they were pretty active on the first day. They signed quarterback Justin Fields. Then they also signed a couple of guys in the defensive backfield. They signed a cornerback from Baltimore, Brandon Stephens, and then a safety from Jacksonville, Andre Cisco. And then some there've been some signings, but they've been relatively small ticket signings. So, if you look at where the Jets really spent their money in free agency, it's a quarterback and it's in the defensive backfield. And I think that should tell you something. Now, everybody knows quarterback's the most important position on the field. Everybody knows the Jets had a hole there. But the fact the Jets spent the rest of their money, or at least the other big signings came in the defensive backfield, I think that's very telling. It's something I've discussed a lot on the show about how I think the focus of the defense has turned from the defensive line, where it was under Robert Saleh, and is now on the defensive backfield. And that makes sense when you consider when you compare Robert Saleh's scheme versus Aaron Glenn's. Robert Saleh was a guy who liked to rush 4 and play 7 in coverage. And when you rush 4 and play 7 in coverage, that means your coverage unit is going to be stronger by design than your pass rush. So how do you compensate for that? You get better pass rushers, because they're 4 on 5. Coverage is 7 on 5. Obviously coverage is going to be easier. Aaron Glenn likes to blitz. When you blitz, that means you have extra pass rushers, but it means you have less guys in coverage. That changes the equation. It means that, maybe your individual pass rushers don't need to be as good because you're sending more at the quarterback. There are going to be as many double teams. There are going to be more guys with one-on-ones with opportunities to win. But it also means that you don't have as many guys in coverage. And that means the back of your defense is going to have to be able to hold up. Now, when the Jets signed Brandon Stephens and Andre Cisco, they both kind of had similar profiles. They did not get similar contracts. Cisco's on a 1-year deal. Stephens is on a 3-year deal, which more or less guarantees that he's going to be on the team for the next 2 seasons. But these are both guys who had kind of rough 2024 campaigns. Guys who are kind of, Jets are kind of looking for them to bounce back. And both of them, I think, have traits that conceivably could work in the Aaron Glenn system. For Stephens, he's a big guy. And he's a guy with a lot of experience playing man coverage. He played a lot of man coverage in Baltimore. And the numbers suggest he's a stronger man corner than he is a zone corner. And with Aaron Glenn, it's going to be a lot of man coverage. You'll see both. Like, every team runs a lot of both. But Robert Saleh tended to like to play zone coverage. Now, with critical downs where they'd man up. But Robert Saleh was really a zone coach. Aaron Glenn is going to be among the highest. You would think with Aaron Glenn, they're going to be among the highest rate of man coverage this season. So a guy like Stephens, playing man to man, that's going to be important. And one advantage Stephens will have is that he's not going to have to take the other team's best receiver, because the Jets have an excellent man corner in Sauce Gardner. And Aaron Glenn's scheme could potentially unlock Sauce Gardner, because Sauce Gardner, in some ways, not entirely, and this is a bit unfair to say, but Sauce Gardner, in some ways, is kind of wasted in his own scheme, because there just aren't many corners capable of manning up one-on-one against number 1 receivers. And you're not really, you don't really utilize that talent if you're playing a lot of zone the way the Jets have the last 3-4 years. So with Sauce Gardner holding up one-on-one against the other team's best receiver, Brandon Stephens now has to hold up against the other team's number 2 receiver. And look, there are questions. This was a risky signing. Risky doesn't always mean bad. I think sometimes as NFL fans, we have this connotation with the word risky that it means bad. It doesn't necessarily mean bad. Sometimes risks pay off. Sometimes risks provide a big reward. And if Brandon Stevens, makes good on his physical ability, and if the Jets can coach him up on the defensive side of the ball, this could be a signing that works out quite well. One of the things that's tricky about free agent signings, I always talk about this, like the flashiest signings aren't always the best ones. Sometimes it's a signing that you don't really get at the time, but another team just sees something in the player and they realize, even if this contract seems like a little bit too generous right now, the way we're going to coach this guy up, it's going to look like a bargain by the end of it. And sometimes that's how it works out. I think the Jets are hoping that's how it will pan out with Brandon Stevens. So a guy who I think fits the system. And I think you could say the same for Andre Cisco. And I think Cisco actually might end up being a really sneaky good signing because he's coming off a disappointing season in Jacksonville, which actually saw him being benched. But he had back-to-back seasons before that where he had at least 3 interceptions. And he's a guy who plays the deep safety spot a lot. And when you play man-to-man, typically you'll play a single high safety a lot. Man-to-man means that there's one safety in the middle of the field to take away the deep routes. And you have a guy, again, in Andre Cisco, who had 7 interceptions the 2 years preceding in 2022, 2023. Maybe a down year in 2024 that saw his benching. But you also have to remember that the Jacksonville team was a mess. I mean, how many guys on the Jets in 2024 had inexplicable down years? And I think it was just like they just kind of got caught in a situation that was dysfunctional. And I think the same is true in Jacksonville. In fact, the Jaguars may have been even more dysfunctional last year than the Jets, which was tough to do. And I don't know how much of that's really Cisco's fault. I mean, I think Jacksonville had a lot of guys who underperformed last year. And I know this sounds like I'm making excuses, but I do think that like sometimes you just get into a situation where things snowball on a team. And for whatever reason, guys have trouble performing. And I think maybe that's what happened with Andre Cisco last year. And the deep safety in a man-to-man scheme is very important because he's kind of the last line of defense. He's the guy that can, to the extent the corners get help, that's where it is. The help is in the middle of the field. And that's a guy you typically want to be a playmaker. You think about the great center fielders of the last couple generations. And Andre Cisco is not one of them. Andre Cisco is not at the level of Ed Reed or Earl Thomas. But that's the type of player that shows you what a difference a deep center field safety can make, because those guys were really special. Cisco's not on their level. I'm not suggesting that he's on the level. The point I'm trying to make is that's the type of guy you're looking for to play the deep safety spot. And Cisco is a guy who can be a quality player. He's been a quality player in the past. And so essentially what the Jets have done is they've taken 2 gambles on guys with ability. And they think that they have the right system for these guys. They think they have the right coaching to make good on the talent that these guys possess. If the Jets are right, these could be signings that work out very well. And if they're not right, well, Cisco is only here on a 1-year deal. Stevens is a little bit trickier, but I think that it's clear where the Jets are prioritizing things this offseason. And you see which positions they value, because they didn't really spend that much at other spots, but they spent money at those 2 spots, the quarterback position and the defensive backfield. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to some of the lower profile signings the Jets have made. And I don't think the Jets are expecting all these moves to work out, but I think they're looking to catch lightning in the bottle maybe once or twice. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We're talking about what the Jets have done in free agency. It's kind of been an intriguing offseason for the New York Jets. Not very much like last year. A year ago, the Jets were making splashy move after splashy move. They signed Mike Williams. They signed Tyron Smith. They traded for Hassan Reddick. They were bringing in a lot of big names to try and load up around Aaron Rodgers. This year, it's been a much more modest approach, which was to be expected. Last year, all in was the buzz phrase around the Jets pretty much from start to finish. This year, we have a first-year head coach. We have a first-year GM. there are some things to clean up on this roster. Typically in a situation like this, there's a much more cautious approach because the head coach and GM have as much political capital as they ever will. They know they're probably not going to get fired after 1 year. This is the one time where they actually have kind of a grace period because they're inheriting a situation that isn't that good. They'll have a bit of time to build things up before they get heavy criticism. So it's a more cautious approach. And you've seen a lot of very cautious signings by the New York Jets. I mean, you could just go over the weekend. There were a number of players the team agreed to terms with. None of them were particularly big names. I mean, we could talk Tyler Johnson, a wide receiver who just previously played with the Rams. We could talk about Chris Boyd, who's a cornerback and special teamer. Jay Tufil. If you go back late last week, Stone Smart, a tight end they got from the Chargers. They signed a linebacker, Jamin Davis. We could go down the list. Josh Myers, a little bit of a higher profile name they signed last week from the Green Bay Packers. Or, you could talk about the offensive lineman, the right tackle, Chukwuma Okorafor. Lots of names that really aren't household names. And I think if the Jets were being honest, the Jets will never, nobody will ever be honest. You'll never get an NFL executive. And this is not like this is not me saying anything bad about Darren Mougey or Aaron Glenn. It's true of like all 32 teams. You're never going to get a head coach or a front office member to be honest about something like this. But if the Jets are being honest, they would tell you that they're not expecting all these guys to hit. They acknowledge that like a lot of these guys are going to be misses. These are not players who are typically very highly desired across the league. These are not guys who had a huge market for them. But what the Jets are hoping, I think, it kind of goes hand in hand with what I just mentioned about Cisco and Stevens. These are guys who I think they believe could be good fits for their system based on their attributes. And I think what the hope is maybe one or two of these guys turns into a good starter because, for the most part, the guys I mentioned, they're on 1-year contracts. And in many ways, like a 1-year contract in a situation like the Jets are in right now is kind of a tryout. A year ago, 1-year contract for the Jets when the Jets thought they were a Super Bowl team, that might have been like, maybe this guy fills a critical hole. For a first-year head coach and first-year GM, a 1-year contract typically means we're giving you a look. We're going to see how well you fit our system. We're going to see how well you take to our coaching staff, and hopefully something pans out here. And if it does, then we'll try and bring you back next year. It's kind of a very low risk move. So, like on the higher end, you have somebody like Josh Myers, who's got a lot of starting experience in the league. On the lower end, you have someone like Stone Smart, who was a converted wide receiver, and he converted to wide receiver from quarterback. So this is a guy who really hasn't been running routes for very long, has been playing the tight end position for an even shorter period of time. You're hoping that you're kind of just betting on traits, you're betting on pedigree, and you're betting that the guy's going to be a good fit for your system. And you hope that a couple of these guys turn into good players for you. And I think that's kind of like the genesis of what the Jets are doing here. They're kind of just spreading their money around on a bunch of guys. And hoping that, maybe they strike gold in 1 or 2 spots. And, also there's a bit of a focus we've seen on special teamers. One guy I mentioned, Chris Boyd, who plays a lot of special teams. The Jets also announced that they were re-signing a return guy, Kenny Nwangu, who I declared that he actually had a huge game against Seattle. He ran a kickoff back for a touchdown. He recovered a fumble on a kickoff. I remember after that game, I declared him as my new favorite player, and I think that still stands. So Kenny Nwangu is back. I think special teams is another important part. I am actually kind of happy to see the Jets have signed some guys who can help on special teams, because I say that I use this number all the time, and I think it's true. Special teams are a hidden part of the game. Around 20% of every play in an NFL game is a special teams play. So I think if you're looking for a broader theme here, it's like the Jets are kind of looking at the little things. They're trying to find guys under the radar who maybe don't have a big market, but maybe fit for them. And that's one of the things you find in the NFL is the Sauce Gardners and Garrett Wilsons of the world are going to be guys who fit any scheme. You can put them on any of the 32 teams and they're going to have success. They're going to play really well because their skill set's so diverse that they're just going to pan out. They'll be great no matter where they are. Most of the players in the league, though, play on the league minimum. And most of them have certain things that they do well and certain things they don't do well. And one thing that teams in the league really struggle with is figuring out how to use somebody in a way that accentuates their strength, but doesn't doesn't put them in a vulnerable position. Essentially, you're looking to make sure your system uses a player's strength but hides their weaknesses. Don't put them in the spot where they have to show their weaknesses, and it's a challenge. Every team says they try and do it, but few teams are successful at it. And like we can talk about like Bill Belichick. One of the things Bill Belichick was always good at was figuring out what his players did well. Now, of course, like obviously having Tom Brady was really, really helpful and probably the biggest part of Belichick's success. But one of the things Belichick always impressed me with was his ability to understand what a player's skills were and what his weaknesses were, and put him in a position where his skills could shine and his weaknesses were hidden. Now, we don't know how good or how successful Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey are going to be at this. This is a first-year head coach, first-year GM. So we're going to hope that they're good at it. We don't know. We don't know that for a fact, and we'll start to find that out. But I think that's clearly the plan, is they have a template of players that they want. They have a template of skills that they want at each position. They've gone out and gotten the guys that they think fit. And you're never going to bat 1,000 of these things. Look, you could sign big name free agents every single year. You could sign established guys. Not all of them are going to work out. But if one or two of these guys could turn into a long-term starter for the Jets, that would be a very good and very productive free agency period. And that would help the Jets as they continue to build for the future, future that they hope will be successful under this new regime, Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.